Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 186 of Speaking from the Heart. I'm going to warn you that today's episode really dives deeply into the consciousness that we all have as human beings when it comes to connecting with others, because today's guest really brings a different perspective, not just on what we have always said on this show about breaking through barriers, using our voice to change the circumstances that we have around us, but realizing that the power of words really do change other people. I have the privilege and honor to introduce today Bambi Lynn. And Bambi is a single mom of 6 adult children and 13 grandchildren, in which one passed away hours after he was born. She is a 2-time published author, a transplant from Buffalo, New York to the Golden Isles of Georgia, and works for a data company where every day she has the privilege going to people's homes and hearing their stories. She's living the next chapter of her life as an empty nester and enjoys the next chapter of becoming the best version of herself through the story that she has to tell others. Man, she had a story to tell, and as we continue to go deeper and deeper into this conversation, you notice that even my tone, what I usually have as a straight-faced podcast host and even business owner on this show, I literally broke down, and you're going to see a raw version of myself that you haven't seen, especially if you've been following me since the very beginning for a very long time. But when we get to the other side of this conversation today, there's a few things I have to point out. First off, what is it that you want to feel heard about? What do you feel acknowledged that you are able to create that story? Maybe that story that has been muffled, maybe has been shuttered, maybe that has been thrown aside. How do you become vulnerable while being able to do that? Making sure that you feel comfortable in your own skin is something that I think we all struggle with, especially when we're in our work profession, maybe we're doing our business, maybe it's even our own lives. Being able to share those big moments in which we really want to celebrate, but they're not celebrated by others. That impact, how we can be left with a lasting impression, is something that I will take away for the rest of my life from this conversation. And I hope that you do too, because it isn't just about being this child of God, which we talk about a little bit of how that functions into the bigger picture of our lives. But I think when you hear Bambi's story and her compassion in her heart, I think you start to understand why she has been really one of the top 10 guests that I've had on this show that really align with the purpose of why it truly matters, no matter what you might feel, to be the authentic version of yourself to unlock that best version of who you are. But with that, let's go to this very emotional episode. All right, we're here with Bambi Lynn. Bambi, thanks for sharing your heart with us today.
Well, thanks, Joshua. It sounds like I'm talking to my son.
Yeah, boy. I had this feeling already when we were starting to talk that I was going to be associated with your son. So yes, listeners, before I even started this show, I have a new mom. And I'm sorry for my current mom. I love you, but Bambi has adopted me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really excited to be on here. So let's go for it.
Let's do it. So I've already let the listeners know a little bit about your background, Bambi, but I have to start off with a question that I think might be eye-opening for some of my listeners that heard it in the intro. You have, get ready, 6 adult children, 13 grandchildren. Holy moly.
I do.
That is a lot.
I have 4 daughters. My oldest daughter is 37, and then my twins are the last. I have identical twins that are 25. I have 13 grandchildren, and I have one that did pass away 9 hours after he was born. So there's 12 living, and there are 13 total. And most of them all have Bible names, and I have 10 grandsons and 3 granddaughters.
That is a lot of family. And I'm wondering, are you guys close-knit and all tight together, or are they in different parts of the country?
Sometimes I hate that question, but like everything, I do have 6 children. I love each and every one of them, but there's some that I just don't like, and there's some that just don't like their mother. So, I fit into the little category. We, as mothers, we raised our children, and then some of our children didn't like the way that they were raised. So I do have 2 children that don't speak to me, but 4 that do. So I remind them all the time, even with the 4, if you don't speak to me, I got 3 more. If you don't speak to me, I got 2 more. If you don't speak to me, I got 1 more. And that one, she'll always talk to me.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I actually have a sister that doesn't talk to our family, including myself. So I completely understand even the sibling aspect of how that dynamic kind of creates some rifts. And I'm sorry to hear that too. But, part of life too is that we know who those people are that are going to support us, even family for that matter.
Absolutely.
So
And that's so true. And the other thing is that when you were seeing the picket fence, that you have 2 children, this picket fence, and everybody's sitting around at Thanksgiving, that probably happens maybe 10% of people in life. I always say, whenever I see things on Facebook, dang, I wish I was a fly in their wall. When it's just like when you take family pictures, before the family pictures, of course, your mother is going, you better not ruin this picture. You better not, you better sit up, don't run in the mud before this picture. And then we get this perfect picture, but we never know what happens behind the scenes before that picture was going to be taken. So life is life, and it's a journey.
it is a journey, and it has taken me and you on a variety of different rides because we were talking a lot about it before the show. But I really want to focus on this for a second because it will set up what you have done, which you already have written 2 books. But before we get into that, you work for a data company. Now, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that because you say that you reach out to people by hearing their stories, essentially. So tell us a little bit about that because you got my curiosity
Well, I
going.
work for Nielsen TV Ratings. We're the company.
Ooh.
Yes, we're the company that does all the ratings on TV. What I do is that Nielsen has a live panel. So all across the country, there are 42,000 homes that are picked to be part of the Nielsen ratings. What I do is that Nielsen gives me a whole bunch of addresses. Those addresses were the addresses that were picked to be part of the ratings. I go to their door, knock on their door, and say, "Hey, I'm Bambi, and you are the new Nielsen home." So it's pretty much what I do. And I've been doing that. Before I worked for Nielsen, I worked for the United States Census Bureau. And I used to go in and do surveys all in people's homes. So the last 17 years of my life, I have done Nielsen and the Census Bureau. So that's what it means that I get to go into people's homes every single day and sit at their table and not only offer them a product, but I also get to hear their stories. And for 17 years, hearing other people's stories, if you don't get impacted by hearing somebody's stories and there's something wrong with you, there's an empathy part because I've been in all types of homes from working with the Census Bureau and with Nielsen. I've been in multi-million-dollar homes in Malibu sitting on a mountain, to roach-infested homes inside of the projects, to trailer parks that their homes are falling apart, to women that just got a phone call that the cancer's been back. And here, I'm the person that gets to be at their door, and I'm the first person that gets to hear their story. And also, because some of these people that are part of the surveys that I have done, nobody would ever be in their homes. They're people that people wouldn't talk to. Some of them are people that you walk down the street and you don't even notice them. And I get to be somebody in their life that gets to notice that. I get to be somebody in their life that gets to impact their lives and they impact mine.
Have you ever worried about your safety in terms of entering some of these homes or any concern whatsoever, especially walking to that place? Because I imagine that, like you said, you've been to numerous different places. I wonder sometimes if that ever came up as a concern.
It only comes up a little bit now that I'm a little older, but there's a way you command an audience. And most people are nice people. Yeah, there are groups and there are parts. When I worked for the Census Bureau, I've gotten out of cars that you're like, I think I need to get back in. And I remember this one time that I went into the projects in New Jersey, in fact, and there were a bunch of guys sitting on this balcony. And I get out of my car and they're like hooting and hollering and hearing out and being jerks. And I remember going up, I climbed up the stairs and it happened to be that home, that door that they were all sitting around. So they're like going on. And I looked at them and I said, all of you be seated. And so they all said, and I said, you never hoot and holler a woman over 30. I am a mother. I could probably be all of your mothers. I said, don't ever do that. That's disrespectful. And they're like, stand back and like, oh, we're sorry, ma'am. We're sorry, ma'am. We're sorry. It's just that you command your audience. I mean, there are times working with the Census Bureau and Nielsen, there's been times that I've sat there and there's been Coke line sitting. I actually went to a brothel once. An address was picked for the Census Bureau.
Wait, there was actually a brothel that you had to do for Nielsen TV ratings.
Not Nielsen. I actually went up and it was an address that was picked to do a crime survey. And so I walked up and there's a brothel. And so people were coming in and out. We were sitting on the couch outside on the thing, sitting in the back, sitting there just talking away. And I knew that one of the questions you were going to ask is the question about my name. Well,
Yes.
you're in a brothel and my name is Bambi. So, that was kind of interesting, but it was a really good interview. It was just a really good interview with the woman. And after I left, there was an orange coupe car that came up to the thing and the lady's going, bye, Bambi. And the guy goes, oh, Bambi. And I hurried up and ran into my car and I called my manager. I said, don't ever send me to something like that again. And nobody knew the addresses because the addresses are random. So yeah.
That is an exhilarating experience, I have to say the least. And yeah, you're right. With your name and what it can be associated to, I don't want to even dive into that per se, but it can be quite fascinating. I can imagine being on all these different types of surveys, especially with the US Census and Nielsen. And I wonder, I'll end it with this one question before we move on. What do you think has been the most unique experience doing all of these door-to-door visits that you encounter? What's been one consistent thing that you've seen over all this time that you've been doing it?
That people really want to tell their stories. People really want to be heard. And it gives you empathy as a person. We all have perceptions. Every single person, whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whether you're poor, rich, whether you come from a good home or a bad home, we all have perceptions. We all have ideas in our head that when we go someplace, we create this idea, we create this story of where we're going. One thing that this job has done for me for 17 years of my life, it's changed perception. It's changed me and it's given me empathy that I probably would have never had because, I've had to go into all kinds of homes. I've had to go into all kinds of religious homes, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of demographics. And you begin to stop having those preconceived notions in your head. And you begin to start seeing people as people and wanting to hear their stories because stories transform us. And each one of their stories has created who I am today. If I didn't spend 17 years, and it's going to make me cry as I think about it, if I didn't spend 17 years knocking on people's doors, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't be the compassionate and full of empathy and full of love of the person I am today. I would have still been a young person with ideas. And even though I've had these conversations with my homes, even if I have a different perspective than you, I can sit at your table and learn from you. And that's probably your purpose of even doing, podcast, for the fact that you get to be changed because these stories impact you. And so I am privileged and I am blessed that I am the person I am today, but I owe it to all those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that I've interviewed throughout the years.
You struck me right at the heart too when you said that, Bambi, because you're right. I've had almost 200 episodes now. Most of them have been monologues, but I've had almost 100 guests essentially overall that each had their own unique story. And for each one that I've heard, there's always been a perspective that I've taken away. That's always been my mission, even for my listeners, that no matter what walk of life that you come from, there's ultimately hope and not only that opportunity to survive, but to thrive as well. And I think that you have said some things that are absolutely true too, that we just want to be heard. And I think that just listening is skill in itself that sometimes we forget that all it takes is just having the 2 ears that were granted and using just one mouth, because let's be real, we have many different mouths with our nonverbal and verbal, which most of the time I'm talking about in public speaking, but that's why we have 2 ears. We should be using both of those as opposed to just using the one. Yeah.
And that's kind of even, why I wrote, it took me 25 years to finally write my story. And people ask me all the time, why did you write your story? Why did you want to be vulnerable enough to tell? And I told my story because I believe that my story is a first aid kit for somebody else's story. That I wrote my story so somebody else can be brave enough to write theirs. I wrote my story. I was willing to plow the field for somebody else to come behind me and said, if she was brave enough to write her story, if she was brave enough to be vulnerable, then so can I. Because we all have skeletons in our closets. We all have secrets in our closet. But once we start talking, and that's what I did when I wrote my book, I told my story. And once I told my story, I no longer had bondage to it anymore. I was set free. And that's what people need to know and need to believe, that when you are able to be vulnerable enough to open up your closet of secrets and your closets of skeletons, it no longer has anything to do with you anymore. It sets you free. And so my book was the sole purpose to be able to set other people free and to know that your story is no different than my story. So let's lock hands together and let's journey this together.
Let's talk about your books because of that segue. You wrote 2 books. For my listeners, obviously, I'll have the links in the episode notes. You can also visit her website to have this. But there's the Journey of Josephine and then the Treasures of My Heart.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which one you want to start with, but I'm wondering if you could give us a quick high-level synopsis of both.
Sure. I'll give you the Journey of Josephine. The Journey of Josephine is my story, and it takes place with a little rag doll that I received when I was 6 years old. She was my security blanket. She was the person that never told my secrets, and she was the one that took me through the journey of my life. There were things in my life that I had gone through, from abuse to suicide to domestic violence, husbands that cheated on me, to brokenness, a teenage pregnancy. And she journeyed with me and helped me take all the pieces of my life, and her and God helped me put them all back together again. That I no longer was a girl of trauma, but I was a girl of triumph. I no longer was a girl of brokenness, but now I'm a girl of wholeness. I'm no longer a girl with all the pieces of my life thrown down on the ground. Those pieces come together, and now I see the masterpiece of what God had planned for me. From the foundations of time, He had a plan for my life. And the trauma, of course, trauma stops your growth. And so all you know is trauma. You know, I was sexually abused as a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, by my grandfather. And so I'm not the person that I was supposed to be, so to speak. I was supposed to be something different, but because trauma came in, and my dad was an alcoholic, and my parents split up over and over again throughout our lives until 10 years old, and he finally left. But when you decide to take a journey, and when you decide to look at your life and not look at it through the eyes of your trauma, but look at it through the eyes of who you could become, because who I am today is because of the trauma. Who I am today is because of the things that have happened to me. So then I have the empathy to be able to share that. So the Journey of Josephine is how a rag doll mended a broken heart. I did win gold on my cover, and I won a silver award on my writing. The Treasures of My Heart is about, throughout our lives, there are storms, and stories will continue, but sometimes we get caught up in the storms and we don't see the treasures of the storm. We don't see that that storm is going to get us to the other side. We don't see that darkness has to come back. We then have to have light. You know, you're going to have crying, but then you have to have dancing. So what the Treasures of My Heart is they're little stories on when I was going through something in my life, something traumatic, and something that could have turned something totally different. God showed me a treasure. God showed me something that He gave to me. One example in the book is my dad never loved me. I was the black sheep of my family. My dad was an alcoholic. He was not a nice alcoholic. He wasn't funny. He was a mean alcoholic. And he would tell me every time I got drunk that he hated me and that I wasn't his and things like that. But when I was 8 years old, we lived in Chesapeake, Virginia. My mother wanted to give my dad one more chance to come back to make it work. And what happened is my mom wanted a nativity set. She wanted a barn made for her nativity set. And my dad pointed his finger at me and he said, "You go outside with me." And my brothers and sisters were at the patio, glass doors, and they were staring outside as my dad chose to have me help him make this barn. And that was the only good treasure that I had with my dad. But instead of always remembering my dad as a drunk, God gave me a treasure to remember that I was the only one that got to make that stable with him. So that's what I mean about the treasures of your heart. If we can just begin to start looking in our lives and seeing the gifts that were given to us in the midst of those storms, we're able to survive much better than always being full of trauma. So that is the book, The Treasures of My Heart.
Thanks for that. And summarizing both of them succinctly, I feel like there's so much to unpack with both of these, but I want to start with this simple question. Which one of these books was easier to write for you and why?
Probably The Treasures of My Heart was easier to write because I always wanted to write it. I had no intentions of writing The Journey of Josephine. I always had intentions of writing The Treasures of My Heart. But when I was able to write The Journey of Josephine, every year at my birthday, which is January 8th, which is Elvis Presley's birthday too, I would go to a beach and I would ask God, is it time to write my story? And I always thought that I was going to write The Treasures of My Heart. And 2 years ago, I went to the beach and I said, is it time? And I came home and I saw my rag doll sitting on my bedpost in my guest bedroom. And I realized that it was time to write my story. And my story took me 3.5 weeks to write because it took me 54 years to live it. So I knew it and I never stopped writing. And I needed to write my Journey of Josephine because I needed to put it to rest. And it took me 6 hours one evening to read it throughout the night. But when I read my book and I closed it, I realized I didn't know that woman anymore because I realized that I had become who God had created me to be. The woman that thrives, the woman that loves, the woman that cares about people, the woman that has taken the potter's wheel and has allowed God to transform me. I'm the person that he took all the ashes of my life and turned them into beauty. And so I was able to now put it to rest and to know that my story was written for other people.
I want to latch onto that last piece because when someone writes a book, and I've had many authors on the show, Bambi, that have talked about their experiences in the writing process and even how they got to ultimately where they're at. What has it meant for you to be able to share these stories for other people? So you've just explained how it has helped you personally to walk that life of Jesus and to be able to have that founding of groundness, which I'm associating it with. What have you seen with other people, though, as a result of writing these?
Well, I'll give you an example of a woman that I had met. She lives in that not a very good part of town. When I began to tell her my story, and I decided to give her my book. She was a Black young woman with 3 young children and a single mom. And I gave her my book. And 2 days later, she called me and she asked me if I could meet with her. And I went back to her house and the woman put her arms around me and she said, you told my story. And in my culture, we're never allowed to tell our stories, but you told my story. You knew my story. And I realized then that my story of the brokenness that I've been through in my life and the attempted suicides and the teenage pregnancies and things like that, I realized that it's just not me. It's through culture. It's through different spans of life. It's through young children to older children. It's the grandparents that have still held on to their secrets because I'm old enough that you don't talk about the stuff that happened in your house. Those were secrets. You don't talk about that. And when you realize too that you're not alone, one thing that I do when somebody buys my story, I give away a gift. And the gift that I give away for the Journey of Josephine is that there's candies. It's called Reasons. They're chocolate candy and they're spelled, it's RIESEN. And you get them at the dollar store. And I made a sticker on it and I put the sticker on the Reasons and I put it in with my book and it says, you are the reason I wrote my story. And I give it to them for them to be brave enough to tell theirs. Because if somebody else is willing to tell about the dirty old man that tried to molest you in their car as you were babysitting his children, I'm not the only girl that that happened to. I'm not the only girl that put a bag over her head because she couldn't take the pain anymore. I'm not the only girl that that's ever happened to. I'm not the only girl that found herself in a backseat of a car as a teenager with a guy that I knew didn't love me. I'm not the only one. But if I'm brave enough to tell my story, then other people are brave enough to tell theirs. And so the whole reason I told my story is because I knew I wasn't alone. And I knew that other people weren't alone and that other people needed somebody like me to be brave enough to say, this happened to me. Everybody has different books that they write and different things that they do. My mission is that I want to be able to tell my story to as many people as I possibly can to allow them to tell theirs. So my books are only avenues for me to be on podcasts. They're only avenues for me to be at conferences. It's only avenues for me to get the opportunity to be able to talk to your subscribers and say that you're not alone. To be able to talk to your subscribers and say, somebody knows, somebody's been there. And that was the purpose.
I reflected on the last few minutes as you're saying all this as to what that passion is that you're trying to give to so many people. And I feel that. I feel that sense of you really want people to not suffer alone because they're not alone in the bigger scheme of things. What has it meant for you to be able to have these interactions with people, like you said, with the young Black woman that you met, and even other people that you've been able to interact with? Do you feel that you not only done the right thing with writing these books to be able to share a little bit of your vulnerability, but do you feel that there has been a achievement, if you will, or do you feel like there's more work yet that has to be
Oh
done?
my goodness, absolutely. There are more teenage girls that need to know my story. There are more cultures that need to know my story. There are more battered women homes that need to know my story. I want to be able to proclaim that, yeah, I was a battered woman. Yeah, I had a husband that spit at me, and I had a husband that choked me and left me on sides of roads, but I'm not that woman. I'm not that person anymore. And I want other women to know that there's hope. I want other women to know that we don't have to be our circumstances. We can be beyond our circumstances. I may have been in a battered home and I may have had another husband that cheated on me, but that's a reflection on them. That's not a reflection on me. I had somebody that my grandfather and an uncle that molested me as a child, and I took that on myself and began living a life that represented that. But then when I realized who I really was, I could represent who I am. And that kind of, like, in a way, tells about the segment of my name. For years, since I was a little girl, I hated my name. I hated it with a passion. I was bullied as a kid. I went to school and people picked on me. I didn't have dates in high school because no guy wanted to be known. His girlfriend's name was Bambi. When I found myself in back seats of cars of men that didn't care about me because I was living out what my name meant. And I had husbands that never would introduce me, wouldn't say my name. And when I was about 32 years old, I had enough, and I went to the beach and I went to the courthouse. I got the paperwork and found out that I can change my name for $800. And I wanted the pain to be away. I wanted the pain to be gone. So I wanted to be a new name. And I went to the beach one night and I prayed and I asked God, and I was so mad at him. I was so mad because he knew my name from the foundations of time. And I screamed and yelled and carried on and said, how could you do this to me? Why would you ever name a child Bambi? And I told him I would give him one more chance because I never saw my name in a name book. I have a name that isn't on a keychain. It's not on a license plate. And I said, God, I'm going to give you one more chance. And if my name's not in a name book, I'm changing my name to Janet. And I went to the bookstore. I laid out all the name books on the table. And then I got scared because I was like, oh my goodness, I just gave God an ultimatum. How can I give God an ultimatum? My name is Bambi Lynn. And I opened up the name book and my name was there. For the first time in my life, I found a meaning of my name. And my name means holy child. So it changed the perception of who I thought I was. It changed when I looked in the mirror now. I saw now what God saw. I saw the purity of my name. I saw the holy child. I saw the prince that I am. I saw the daughter of the king. It was a journey. My son has said to me just recently, he said, Mom, all you thought you deserved were just crumbs that were thrown on the ground. And he was right. When I was Bambi, the pole dancer that people thought, when I was Bambi the deer, when I was Bambi of shame, I only had crumbs. But then when I became Bambi, the holy child, I now had royalty. And I learned to walk into that royalty instead of walking into that shame.
I started speaking from the heart for a variety of reasons myself, kind of associated with what you said. And my listeners know all about this. I know I've told you even before the show what was really the big motivator. But the biggest thing that stands out from what you said is that we need to hear that voice. We need to be able to say that we're okay to be who we are and be accepting of it. And that has been ultimately my mission in this. That's been my mission in terms of growing with this. That's been my mission with helping my listeners grow within themselves. And you're saying a lot of the things that I really have consistently harped to, that it's about not just feeling it inside of you, knowing that it's okay to go through these things, but to use that pain and to turn it into purpose. And I feel that that's exactly what you've done to be able to do that. So I got this one last question for you.
Because I do have a son's name that is Joshua, and his name means Jehovah's salvation. So as you are on this podcast and as you are allowing people to share their stories, as you are having an open platform, know that your name also means Jehovah's salvation. You are bringing safety. You are bringing salvation also to the people and the listeners that you have. Once people understand and know their name, they understand that there's your purpose. Your name means Jehovah's salvation. So every time that you tell your testimony and every time you tell your story, you're saving the person behind you that needs to hear your story. So always remember that. And now you can go on.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And now I feel like a hot mess by hearing that too, because there's so much to process with that. But I'm going to forge ahead and ask you this last question. You say that my name is salvation. What about your salvation, Bambi? What's next to help the salvation of so many other people?
Well,
What's next in your journey?
years ago, I had a dream that I was actually walking on a platform and there was a podium on the platform and I looked out into the audience. And when I looked out in the audience, all of the audience looked like homeless people. Like they hadn't taken a bath, they had showered. They were really gross looking, so to speak. They looked tattered. And there was words that were written across their chest: unloved, grief, dirty, shame, all these words. And I began to tell my testimony. I began to say, it's time for us to look in the mirror and realize that we are our own superheroes. We have survived, and gave them the testimony that I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was at a bridge at 16 years old, ready to take my life and have people. I didn't think anybody even know that I was missing. I was 16 years old. If I could just jump and take this pain away and take this agony away and to take the shame away of the life that I was living and things. And a police officer drove by and yanked me off of the bridge. And he took me to a psychiatric center for children. And I had some blood work done and all that other stuff done. And on the next day, somebody called me into the office. And when they called me into the office, the guy had his legs crossed with his little, whatever it's called. And he said, "Did you know you were pregnant?" And I said, "I had no idea I was pregnant." And he said, "Girls like you don't have babies." And I asked him if I can have some time in my room by myself. I needed to process. I'm 16 years old. I'm like, I thought babies only came when two people really loved each other and then a baby comes. I didn't know that a baby could come out of shame. And I went into my room and I lay down on that ground and I said, if there is truly a God and you are truly real, you need to save me and my baby. And I promise you that I will honor and I will serve you all the days of my life. And as I began to tell my story to these people in the audience, I began to tell them the shame that I carried, and I don't carry that shame anymore. I began to see all of these people in the audience change. Their clothing changed. They looked like they had taken a bath, and the words across their chest had changed, that they were beloved, that they were cherished, that they were forgiven, that they were set free, because it's the word of our testimony. Because all of us have a testimony, and it was the word of my testimony that I was a lost person, but that God set me free, and he can set you free too. And so that is my mission. My mission is for that dream to come true. That mission is for me to be able to be on a platform and tell my story of my Redeemer, that he lives within inside of me, and tell my story of the times that I wanted, that my life wasn't worth living. But now today it is worth living. And today it is because it's to set the captive free. I don't have to live in a prison cell. I don't have to live in a prison of my mind. God has set me free. And that is my mission.
Bambi, we're out of time, but I'm going to give you the last few minutes to wrap up, to let us know how we can reach out to you, what social media you might have that might connect with it, and even where you can find your books. And then after you do that, I have some words that I'll save, which is why I jumped right into it. Normally I don't do that, but I got to think about what I want to say to you here before we wrap up. So go ahead and pitch us here.
Okay, well, you can find me on my website called healingthroughstories.com. Healingthroughstories.com is all one word, and it is a place that I do blog weekly, and it's also a place that I allow others to be able to tell their stories, because nobody always just wants to listen to me, but you could be able to tell your stories. You can also find my books on my website. You can also go to Amazon. I know that a lot of people get points and things like that from Amazon. So you can go to Amazon and get my books. One of them is The Journey of Josephine, A Doll That Mended a Broken Heart, and The Treasures of My Heart. They are under Bambi Lynn. I am the Bambi Lynn that writes about my memoir and about my story. I'm not the exotic dancer. You can also find me on Facebook under Bambi Lynn. I'm also on LinkedIn on Bambi Mikowski. I'm also on Instagram, and that is lynn.bambi. But you can also email me if this is something that you have enjoyed and something that you want to talk about. You can also email me at josephine.rstory@gmail.com.
I'll put all of that in the episode notes, but where do I even begin? Some of your story about having a police officer save your life and trying to figure out what life is all about. God, that feels like my story. And, as I get closer and closer and closer to what I'm ultimately helping everybody do, I think that it's so important for even us and even our listeners that want to take charge of their life. And maybe they have been doing that, or maybe they know of somebody else that needs to take charge of their life. These are the things that we can all go through, and we can punish ourselves for the rest of our lives, or we can make a decision to change everything. And I love your story that no matter what you've been through, you don't let that be the barrier that sets you up and pushes you back. And yes, I am a little teary eyed for my listeners, and you probably have heard me before crying on the show, and that's okay. I don't care anymore because I'm over myself. I'm over my imposter syndrome. I'm over the fact that it's okay to go through these things, because we all do in one way or another. It might not be us personally, but we might know somebody that has. And these are the things that we have to find grace in ourselves, whether we have a God, which I know you believe in that, Bambi. Some of my listeners don't, and some of them are trying to find that answer in their lives, of whether that is a religious context or some other spiritual answer, and that's okay. But regardless of where you're at, I have to say, your story touches me because you're willing to share those stories and help others without anything in return. It's the most selfless thing that I've heard yet on the show. And it touches me to know that you have people that love you, respect you. They have seen what you've done, and that you continue to have this faith that no matter what has shaken you, whether it's from your family, your dad, or even what you have been through to get to this point. I love the fact that you keep pressing forward. So my words of advice to you as a coach, to somebody that is continuing to work on this practice of helping others to see the best versions of themselves, don't give up. Don't let anybody ever say to you, like people have said to me in my life, that you're worthless, you're a sack of shit, or anything like that, because you're not. You are worth every single thing. So Bambi, for all those reasons and so much more that I could just go on and on about, I really mean this. Thanks for speaking from the heart today. Thank you for sharing what you have shared. And really, I appreciate you being part of the show.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be able to set the captive free.
From the bottom of my heart, I really thank Bambi again for being part of this show, sharing so deeply about her struggles, how those struggles have turned into purpose, and how that has manifested even in me the purposes that I have been trying to drive towards all my life, creating that version of who I am today. Now, I have the unique pleasure of even doing these types of recordings way in advance. And I've had a few months in between this interview and when I actually started recording this, in which a lot has happened, even in my own life. This isn't very often that these sort of circumstances happen, but everything that I have even talked about in this interview that Bambi said, even to me, has come true. I have broken through. I have really seen many of the things that have been struggles for me come through to the other side. especially as we have entered this 2025 year, it's been monumental to reflect back, looking at all the things that I was talking about at that time, and now being able to share with you to the public, even after I've gone through some of these things that even we talk about on the show, and how that even impacts me to this day. So, as I go through my notes and I go through what I want to share with you as some takeaways, I want you to really think about the fact that even this past version of Josh Smith that was talking to Bambi really learned a lot. When we look at this whole conversation, we have to look at the fact that people that might not want to be in our lives, that don't want to stay engaged with us because they don't love us anymore, they don't cherish us, we start to see that we have to define our own purpose again. And it's awesome to talk about this because I've seen clients that have redefined their purpose after they have lost a lot of things in their life, including their loved ones, whether that's through a decision that was made together or some other circumstance that made them feel inadequate. But they can hear these stories. These people that are really changing their lives hear all the context, all the direction from all those other people that have worked hard. And now they are commanding their own audience. And that's really something that I think that we don't even pay attention to as much as we should. That when we get out of those circumstances that have been holding us back, whether that has been financial, whether that has been something that has been really testing our mindset, we are now going through a different type of trial, something that we never realized that we could have that voice in as a result of finding it, unlocking it. But can you say that you talk to things in your life that not only want to be heard and feel acknowledged with, but to do it as a job? Bambi's job really stuck out to me because it isn't just something that you do as a coach, but she's doing it as something in a completely unrelated field. And I think that's about how we can change our perceptions, how we can just be human, looking at the fundamental core of why we're doing a job. It isn't just about the money. It isn't just about what we're trying to gain from it, but it's about what we can become as more well-rounded by listening to people that we have to interact with. Bambi's perspective brings me all the way back to my college days, which I've even shared on a number of episodes, talking about how my perspective working in a manufacturing plant that made plastic bottles for the pharmaceutical industry really changed my life. It helped me so much starting out as a college kid, getting a bigger perspective on the overall world. But this opens up a question of how much is too much when you become vulnerable. How can you plow that field that you have in front of you? And I love that expression of how we can till that field, being able to plant the seeds in which we're able to germinate, but yet it isn't just about the nature, it isn't about the conditions. It's also about who is actually planting them, ourselves. So that journey of Josephine, something that she talked about quite a lot, is something that we can all walk through. We have to have stability and courage, however, to do that. We need to know that firmly planting our feet is not just enough. We also have to go through the trauma of knowing that sometimes it's very tough for us to see that other side. But that trauma, if we're able to break those chains, just like in Josephine, that story, really can help us so much in seeing how we are able to paint this vivid picture of what a reality really is. As she talked about the treasures of my heart, one of the books, which again I'll put in the episode notes, it talks about, for me personally, and maybe for you, my listeners, how even though darkness might push us down, how we push ourselves towards the light is really what's more important. We might have to build that barn. That barn might be the treasure that helps us shield from all those other darknesses. But pushing away those storms so that we find shelter, that we're able to find the courage to move forward, I think for me was the start of my own downfall in this episode, because I realized that so much literal context when she was talking about this story really relates to my own life. Growing up on a farm, using the barn reference that she referred to is something that I actually took shelter in, especially on dark nights where I felt extremely alone and I wasn't quite sure who to turn to. But even then, when you feel that you're disciplined, when you know that you can put everything to rest, sometimes letting go, the things that we really need to separate ourselves from, was what really got me at the end of this show and really wanted me to hold on for dear life, trying to compose myself, knowing that Bambi's situation, what she was referring to, was something I desperately wanted to hear and that I wanted you to hear too. Because that impact in all these areas of our lives, whether we are sheltering them in a barn or we're trying to get away from the darkness so we can see the light, means that we have to challenge our perspective. We have to go beyond the circumstances of our actions and the responsibilities of today, maybe even separating ourselves from the frustrations of that so that we can have a better future, that we can be able to create content for ourselves, that we are able to envision a future that is positive. But more importantly, you have to realize that even deep down in what Bambi was saying today, it's all about how we can be that holy child, not being ashamed of who we are. If we're able to find salvation through all the faults that we might have done, even our own perspectives, even challenging what other people might have as those perspectives, there's no shame in that. There's none. It's about us learning through conditions in life and through various situations that we have that we can get to the other side, that we are important people, that we have areas that although we're changing in, we are learning and growing and we're expanding our minds and hearts to become better, more compassionate people. And I think that's why, at the very end, I didn't want her to give up. I didn't want Bambi to give up on this dream of knowing that she is making such a wonderful impact. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, I finally found the person on the show that is actually doing that kind of work and living intentionally, even though that this isn't her full-time job. Her full-time job is doing something completely different. This is just the bonus, if you wanted to look at it that way. But it's no kind of bonus when you are trying to help people get through the pain, through the problems that they have in their lives, and being able to see that brighter picture that is able to be created on that canvas that is blank today. In my life, and since this recording, I have learned so much about what it means to persevere, to see that other side. I've been able to gain freedom and perspective because of listening to people like Bambi. This show, whether it is something that I really wanted to start out with in my 90-day experiment to see if this would even take shape, turn into something much more for me that changed my heart and changed my mind forever. If it wasn't for speaking from the heart, if it wasn't for my ability to speak from that heart, I want to be able to share these awesome stories and perspectives with you. So this isn't about gloating. This isn't about saying that I'm glad I created this context for all of us to share. I'm here because I know that something drove me to wanting to do this. And it wasn't because of some great business idea now that I look back. People want to feel heard. People want to be accepted, and that's why I do this show. I want you, my listeners, to really see that it's about the small things in life that we're willing to manipulate, that we want to change the playing field so that we can give people that stability and courage to walk out of those barns. They are not feeling sheltered anymore. They want to see through darkness the light that is contained inside of them. I don't know what kind of light you might be searching for today. Maybe the light that you have discovered already is sufficient enough, and maybe you are doing good. But is there more room for improvement? I think that even for myself, listening to my own words, talking to Bambi, I know that I don't have the ability to put this down. I know that I can take control of the things in my life, but yet at the same time do more, be better. Trying to change my own life means that I have to get even more uncomfortable than I have ever been. Through this episode, I changed. And it wasn't just because of this guest, but it's because of all the people that impacted her, that impacted me. We are all sharing these perspectives, almost as if we were all around a campfire. Literally, as I was talking about in episode 183, how we can have that group of people that can impact us and help us to war that fire that's inside of ourselves. Don't ever be ashamed today of who you are and what you are becoming. even if you make mistakes, even if there's things that create shame, and maybe even have that imposter syndrome in which you just don't care anymore, kind of like what I literally said at the end of what it means to know that I'm living a life full of intention. I want you to know, my listeners, that nothing is impossible. If you're just willing to listen to stories like this, and you're willing to say to yourself, wow, I wish I was that brave, just like Josh and Bambi were today, to talk about these things, that's all that matters. That's all it counts, is that I planted that seed for you to mull over, and when you're ready to talk about how to do it, we are there for you. There's no such thing as giving up. There is no such thing as losing your mind to the darkness and evil that might surround you. I know that if you're just willing to share what's on your heart, hold back from all the fear that you have, and just say to yourself that this trauma, this feeling that has been binding me for so long, is not going to hold me back anymore, I promise you, success will definitely come in more ways than you might have ever imagined if you just sat there and did nothing. Because the treasure that we've been looking for is most definitely in your heart. Thanks for listening to episode number 186 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.